Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Deborah, and this is She Wars Boldly podcast. And today we have a treat for you. We have Clover Johnson, and she is going to share her story. I'm looking forward to listening to this, and I know you all are too. So, Clover, take it away. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, so thanks for having me, Deborah. And let me start by saying a little bit about me and how I got here. So I'm Clover Taylor Johnston, and I'm a co-parenting coach. And I got here because of life experience. What I didn't get in raising my three daughters who are now adults. How did this light bulb go off in me? Well, I had spent 5 years out in China as an ESL specialist. And I returned from China to British Columbia, where two of my children live. And at that time, I was so beat and tired. So it was time to have a rest and essentially be planning the way forward. As it came towards the end of the year, I began thinking of all the life experiences that I had, the lived experiences, the knowledge I had gained, and, just interacting with people across cultures, because by now I had lived 5 years in the UK, I had lived 5 years in China, I am Jamaican, so I have a Caribbean flavor, of course, and I have done a fair bit of traveling across North America and not many to Europe. So I was really winding down from what was a busy season of my life. And at the end, about the fall, when my oldest daughter was in her final year of nursing school, she told me that she was pregnant. Now, she was already married, divorced, and she had a little boy at the time who was just entering high school. So I realized that my plans would now have to be reworked towards facilitating her getting through nursing school, because dropping out was not an option based on my own life experience of having to raise them with minimum input from their dads. And I knew that this was a ramp that she had to get to the stage of graduation. There was no if and but. It had to be done. She had to get there. So when she told me that, everything in my life changed in terms of plans. Then by early the following year, then came COVID. So I didn't think I was going to be just a babysitter, and supporting her in other areas, because I can support her in checking her academic work, reading, and so forth. However, COVID arrived around, I think it was around the March, the lockdown started in BC. And then it got more and more severe. So we were all home, but she had to continue to do classes online. And of course, her preceptorship had to be done in person. So 2 days a week, she had to go into the hospital or whatever the institution they were sending her to at the time. So she just had to be there. So the baby came on February 14th. And so I had to be the one who was going to be there all the time, morning, noon, and night, so she could get all of this accomplished. So in that season of lockdown, what I began to ask myself was, what is my way forward? What is it that I want to do? And now, since all of us were in lockdown, all the service providers were moving online. They were moving online, and so we had access now to what were the possibilities of getting things done online. And so I joined a challenge And during that period, I was asking myself, what am I going to do with all of this life experience? And what is it that I didn't get enough of that I would have liked to? And there is a still little voice that said, co-parenting. What would have happened if you even got 50% cooperation as opposed to maybe 25, 30? And that was the light bulb that went off in my head. And I said, wow, yeah, isn't that something? Yes. Had I got that, I wouldn't have had the periods of emotional overwhelm, the periods of financial overwhelm, and in the first 10 years of their life, to some degree, physical overwhelm. And so I took it from there. This challenge encouraged us to go online and start, doing a live, choose one aspect of promotion that you want to do. And so I began to choose Facebook Lives. And at first I started doing it for fun. And yes, it was great. And I started sharing snippets and pieces of my life experience and, how I could help people with the lack that I experienced. But from there, I realized that I was getting a lot of traction. And so I began to get more serious. So I think I did it for about 2 years as a hobby on and off. And then in the last 2 years, I decided that no, this is really a big issue for women, but not only for women, for men. The co-parenting space is a trouble space, right? It's a space that I call everyone who is in the co-parenting space experiences the 3 V's of co-parenting: the volatility, the violence, and the void. And I'm going to explain that because the volatility is that up and down roller coaster of emotions, of dealing with uncooperative partners. Rarely are they cooperative, especially in the beginning when the rawness of the breakup and all of that, it's just tearing and eating away at every fiber of our being. So it varies in degrees. And then the violence, again, it varies in degrees, but it's those nasty texts. It's those curse words. And some of it is also in person. And the void is that emptiness that we feel as we are navigating the space towards going towards some period and some aspect of normalcy. So that void, that emptiness, how did we get here? And we question ourselves and, we go through, the shame scripts, because fear and shame are the 2 default emotions that we sort of naturally veer towards when this kind of situation faces us, because we are unraveling and we can't put a logical conclusion to how we got here. So those are the 3 V's that we all experience, but we experience them to varying degrees depending on the kind of life that we are living. So my story in the shortest version I can give you. My marriage started unraveling. Let me go to the unraveling. When my eldest daughter was 4 years old and my younger was 5 weeks old, it started unraveling. How did I know it was unraveling? There was the worst tropical cyclone that ever happened in the country of Jamaica, where I was living then, of the 20th century. And I was holding my 5-week-old baby and watching rainwater pouring in as the roof in the living room just peeled off. At this time, my then husband had been unemployed for about 4 or 5 months. He had lost his job early that year, and he was hell-bent on starting his own business without having any lead time to really plan for the start of a business. Because ideally, you plan a business by transition from somewhere to somewhere. So it makes it even more challenging when you're transitioning into a new business coming from rock bottom. So that in itself was extremely challenging. And I'm sure it contributed to the way he showed up at the time. When that happened, of course, we had to move out of the house. And so I moved short term to a friend's who still had water and electricity because they were in a new townhouse. And I remember the day he was dropping us off there, I said to him, just a quick discussion. So, what's up? You're staying over, blah, blah, whatever it is. And he said, no, where I am going, you can't come. Imagine the father of your two children, it doesn't matter. The father of your two children is telling you, with a 5-week-old and a 4-year-old, that basically at that point I'm saying, well, he's detaching from the unit. That was a signal to me. And so shortly after, as the roads cleared and, the communication system came back, my brother and sister came to take us to my parents' family home because we had to reside somewhere while the house was being repaired. During that time, almost 2 weeks later, my infant child developed throat ulcers from the doctor said it was an airborne bacteria of some sort that may have been carried in the hurricane. So I tried to connect with him to say that this was happening and that I had to return to the pediatrician in Kingston. Well, all I got was crickets. Crickets. So I went back to the pediatrician and she confirmed that it was in fact throat ulcers that she wouldn't treat. She referred me to the ENT specialist who were a few steps down the road. He administered, gave a prescription, told me how to apply. And as they say, the rest is history. She recovered, and 4 months later, we moved back to the home, which was repaired by the landlords. On one of my trips to view the house and the repairs, there was an elderly neighbor she was a mother figure to me. And so I went to say hello to her next door. And she said, oh, I saw your husband come over to look, but he told me he's not coming back. And I said to her, no, I said to myself, fancy that he told you, but he hasn't brought the news to me. So that was how I got the news, right? So can you imagine the shock?
That is, wow.
Yes. Talking about closure.
What you felt at that moment. Wow. Like, this can't be real. She's crazy, huh?
Yes, that's what I said to myself then. This can't be real, but it was real. So anyway, I returned and I got back to work and my mom came back to give me just some additional support. The baby was only 4 months old at that time, 4.5. And so she realized that I needed that level, another level of emotional support, since all the foundations around the family unit were just fast disintegrating. So with that, he never really had a conversation with me as such, but a policy I've always had, and that's probably based on the way I was raised in a traditional nuclear family, is that children need both parents. So he had a lot of free time at the time. So my mother said he would come by regularly during the day. So I remember this particular story she shared with me. She loaned me her car and she said to me, in one of the conversations, he said to her, I am just dying for you to take back the car from her so her friends can get to laugh at her. Can you imagine? This is the mother of your two children, the primary caregiver, the source of nurture for them. And at that time, I was literally the physical, the emotional, and the financial, because there was nothing coming from the other side. But that was the level of anger that was being spewed towards me. What kept me focused from not going under with all of this was the fact that I had a template from the family background that I was from, that children are first and foremost your responsibility, and therefore your eyes must be kept on what is it that you must do for your children. So I laser focused on that, or like some say, like an ambulance driver, because they were young. My 4-year-old was going to kindergarten, and she was even late because we had moved out of Kingston. And so the first 2 weeks, she had to stay with a family member. Luckily, she was very accustomed to the family. And we would pick her up on the weekends until I returned. So it was a huge time of emotional adjustment for everyone. But he was MIA. He was just barely showing up. So from there, as I said, it was all crickets. For those initial, I would say 4 years, there was nothing coming financially. But what I was exposed to was the volatility, the loud talking. And as I often say, I am not a doormat, and I often wonder how I kept my cool and how I kept quiet. But it was my faith. And this prepared me. So let's say this was my first rodeo, and it prepared me for the second journey. So my children grew and grew. And what I focused on was personal and professional development, because I know the means to overcoming was that of self-empowerment. A friend had told me, I never forget it. He said, Clover, success is the best form of revenge. And I read that to mean if you can stay the course and focus on yourself and your kids, do everything that's within your grasp for self-improvement and self-development, so you can climb the ladder to where you can be self-sufficient for them, you will be okay. And that became my focus. 5 years or 6 years later, I got involved in a long-term relationship, and I had a third child, a third daughter. So by now, I was a swimmer par excellence when it comes to the emotional ups and downs of life. And I had left my job in banking because I just wasn't able to cope emotionally with the demands. It's a high pressure job. And so I eventually transitioned into work that was done from home, a sort of a sales job. And then I went to work for the government's cultural agency. Now, I had known when I went to work for the government's cultural agency, my last child was a year and a couple months. I had worked in government before for a short time, so I knew now that in 5 years I would be eligible for study leave. So coinciding with her being just over 5 years old, I got the opportunity to study in the UK, in Stirling, Scotland, to be exact. And I remember people asking me how I was going to survive. They asked silly things like, what food are they going to eat? I said, none of them are eating Jamaican food right now. They're eating macaroni and cheese, all sorts of pasta. They're not eating ackee and saltfish and boiled bananas. I said, they'll be fine. They will be fine. That was not my concern. My concern was that I was moving on educationally, which was my focus. It was was a nucleus of building my self-empowerment. And so off we went. And we arrived there on the 31st of August. So it was going towards the end of fall. And when I arrived, I lived in a freshers' hall in a warden's flat. I met some of the most polite. The head porter was the most polite and just so civil. And he asked me the ages of the children, and I told him, and he said, okay, so the 5-year-old, there's a minibus that comes on campus and picks up children between ages 5 to 9. They automatically get on it, and it takes them and bring them right back to the entrance. I mean, if the bus came any closer, it would be driving into the reception area. And so I was ecstatic because this was transportation cost I was paying for to get myself to work on time. The older of the two was 13, and he said she will get a bus pass and she will travel free on the regular bus service. My eldest was now 17. She was at the last year in high school, and she wanted to complete her GCE advanced levels. So I allowed that. Now, the experience of arriving in Scotland was totally life-altering. And it wasn't the weather that made it life-altering, but it was extremely different. What was life-altering was the emotional baggage that I shed. I felt so light that I hadn't felt in years, because here was I with my two children. I'm not considering whether child support is coming or it's not coming, and when it's coming. I arrived with 50% of my school fee and 50% of my living, my rent. And so I knew I would have to get a job. But I didn't have to think about any of these two dads in terms of, looking to them for any kind of support. So I indeed felt like a featherweight. I hadn't felt that way in years. And then the adjustment of my children was nothing short of miraculous. The older one, after being there for a month, I sat her down and I said, "You are night and day different. What has happened? You are so upbeat and just dying and raring to go to school." She said, quote unquote, "I am rid of the emotional burden of my father." And I could understand it then, because children look to you for a level of support. And when it's not forthcoming, they feel disappointment, real disappointment. And I know one of hers that she often heard was, "Why does he say we can spend a weekend with him and then he never takes us for the weekend? He always brings us back." That was one of the ones I saw her shed tears about. The 5-year-old, she just carried on as if I've lived there all my life. And so I was able to start and finish a course, and I describe it as hopping on the back of a lorry or a truck going at 90 miles per hour. But I was able to do it because of the emotional stability that I was feeling, and the fact that I knew this was a do or die moment in terms of my professional development and the 3 people that were dependent on me as a source. And so that year of going to Scotland was the final year I collected a child support check of 1,500 Jamaican dollars, which bounced. And I kept it for a long time until I eventually said, "Okay, don't need this anymore." So the struggle is real and the fight is real. And they did exceptionally well, the kids, in terms of their adjustment and their own personal and emotional growth and stability. For my child. And so I lived through those most uncomfortable moments of economic, financial, raw financial exploitation. There's no other way to describe it. But I began again to pray for an off-ramp. But the off-ramp I was looking for was salary enough to get me out of here and to pay for her school fee, because I know he was going to show up short. And so that came towards 2014. So 2013, my eldest daughter, who had now gone through a divorce and had a young child, had helped my now ex-husband to return to Canada for his health, because he was having serious heart problems. So she said, Mommy, I'm deeply overwhelmed and I'm asking if you could come and give me some support. So at the end of 2013, I went up. She said he was going to have some treatment early January. The doctor said that they're hoping to administer this new treatment and hopefully it will be successful. So I went up, I hung in there, and I helped her. And while I was there, I started looking around. This is in BC at the time she was living in the close to Vancouver. So very multicultural, very multi-ethnic. So I began looking around for where could I fit in here in this society, you know, as a literacy teacher with the 5 years experience. I had been teaching college level in Jamaica as a part-time while I was a communications manager full-time. So I'd been teaching in the local colleges and universities. So anyway, I decided that ESL would be the way to look there. And so I went to the Canadian College of Linguistics, did a short course, and one of the tutors, he guided me and said, you know what, go to Craigslist and look for a job. And you don't even need this because of the, you know, the experience and the qualifications that you have. But I said, no, it's a new field for me. And there is always the necessity to sort of get your feet wet, sufficiently wet, that you see a new perspective. Because teaching ESL is a lot different from teaching people who are, you know, native speakers. So I did that at the end of the course, and I jokingly said to him, Craigslist, only buy and sell and rental. He said, no, there's an education section. And so I went there and I saw a job for which I applied. It was an ESL teaching job. And about a week later, they called me up for the interview. And when I went for the interview, I saw a tall, robust British man. I said, wow, I'm expecting a Canadian. Anyway, we had a meeting interview and he said, the job is yours if you would like to have the job. But guess where it is? It's in China. We write curricula and sell these programs to these schools. And we are looking someone to train to go out there and to be the team lead for this program. And so I hesitated for 3 minutes. It wasn't more. And I said to myself, that's the off-ramp you prayed for. That is the off-ramp you prayed for. A salary that could, because my daughter was basically going to be graduating from high school in less than a year. So I had to now work on finding a college that I could afford and ensuring that I could pay the school fee without any help. So that all happened. But again, here's what happened. So we agreed. He said to me at the time, why don't you leave her here? Because the local university, it's only $1 million. I said, okay, you convert that $1 million and send it to her on a regular basis. But I'm asking you for her first year to send her, was it 400? I think it was around 400 Canadian per month. Because it's her first year and she needs to get acclimatized and adjusted before we can put her to work, right? She's coming from a country that's completely different and she needs a time of, you know, just a time of getting acclimatized to everything, the climate, getting used to the transport, organizing her courses, doing homework, all of that. So you do need some lead time to get yourself, you know, completely engaged in your new environment. Well, again, that showed up when it suited him with no regularity. And to this day, only half of what was agreed has been paid. But suffice it is to say that she graduated from the University of British Columbia a few years ago. And so I am deeply satisfied that I stayed the course and I did it because of my commitment to them. It was tough, and I'm not telling you it wasn't tough, because when you have to be investing every cent of emotional, financial energy and constantly supporting and ensuring and encouraging and knowing that there is another parent who is just not functioning, is suboptimal at the best. But while all of this was not happening for my daughter, he had bought himself a Mercedes-Benz the year we went to Scotland. He later bought his son a Mitsubishi Lancer to go to college, just to drive to and from college for $500,000 Jamaican dollars. And he was living high on the hog, throwing himself at 50, threw himself a 100,000 birthday party, always well-dressed and dapper, but not showing up in the way he should, committed to his youngest child. And what I want to say to anyone listening, you are going to feel the pain, right? You're going to feel the pain of breakup. And you are going to get re-triggered when these things happen. How could he do that? Those are the questions you're going to ask. And it's just a normal part of life that you are going to ask it. But feel no shame. I feel your pain because I had it. The onus is not on you to internalize the other person's shortcomings. What they did or didn't do is not your responsibility. What you're responsible for is that you showed up and that you did the best you could with the resources that you had and with all of the capacity that you had. And that's what I did. But it's a painful season when we go through the lack of cooperation, when people betray you by saying, yes, they're going to do it, but it's not done with regularity. You never know when the money is coming. Because if it's not regular, you can't say, oh, it's coming. So you are living with that, and you have to be filling in those gaps until it comes. Yes, it is a source of trigger for the initial pain you felt in the breakup. Luckily for me, my first rodeo had prepared me emotionally, but it doesn't mean you don't feel the pain. It's just that you are better prepared to handle it. And so healing, whenever there is a breakup of any sort, healing should be your first go-to. However, that is for you, whether it's journaling, whether it's your faith, whether it's emotional freedom techniques, everyone will choose the life vest that they want to wear. For me, faith was my life vest, but I still had to do the swimming. But healing has to be, first of all, it's internal. And it happens first by intention, and then by decision backed up by action. No one is coming to save you in the ditch or in the pitch. In the abyss of life, nobody is coming to save you. People will walk with you, people will work with you, but you have to do the work on yourself and for yourself. That is just the way healing works. And you have to give it time. That's another thing about pain and grief in these situations. There's no linear pathway. It is up and down and looping, and it's filled with relapses and sometimes no closure. Right? There are times when closure is actually a myth, and you will never be able to justify or understand. And so you have to just leave it where it is and accept it. That's the best, and move on. But that journey of healing is absolutely necessary. And don't take big gulps. Take baby steps. Movement is medicine, and even crawling counts as movement. Because if you take it in too many big bites, you are going to be in overwhelm. And that can also be crushing, and it can retard your healing process. But it is a prerequisite for you to be moving forward. And what my own story taught me is that every time you fall down, you have a chance to get back up and build back better. And that is resilience, the capacity to get up and rebuild and move forward, right? Not using your mistakes to put yourself down, but to learn from them and to move forward. And so your pain can always write the first chapters, right? Sometimes it can be an auto pen. But what healing does for you is that it gives you, when you have completed or near completed that journey, you can now grab the pen by your fist and you can complete the novel with yourself as the main character. So I am saying this to say that pain can birth your purpose like it has for me. And that purpose creates a platform. And that is why every opportunity I get to be on a podcast, I take it. Because I know there are women out there who are going through the season of life that I went through with difficult, unsupportive co-parents, where they were constantly let down and had to pretty much go it alone. And staying stuck in pain, what you're doing is you are signing a silent agreement with your past. You're not allowing yourself to move into the future by completing that healing process and letting the desire for healing drive you. And I am here to say to you today, while it was tough and difficult, had I not had these pitfalls with the fathers of my children, I wouldn't have gone to graduate school. I wouldn't have had an opportunity to go to China for 5 years. And my children would not have had the backing to give them a developed country's education. And they probably would have struggled way more because it was not a perfect journey, not a perfect journey. But they knew there was someone who had their back. And whenever the call came, that call came to me. It didn't come to any of their dads. And whether that was money that was short for rent when my second was in University of Toronto, or whether it was a summer course, or whatever course it was that was not a part of the original tuition, or whether it was child care for my eldest when she was in her final year of nursing school. It was I who they called. And had I not put myself in that position where I traveled this journey and purpose to heal and had walked through that healing and now had the life experience backed up by the credentials that had allowed me to earn the income to support them when they needed it, it wouldn't have happened for them in the way it did.
Nice, very good. Like I told you, I always ask, what does she wears boldly mean to you?
Okay, so as I said before, I was totally enamored by the title of this podcast because when I associate the roar with a lion, and when you hear the roar of a lion, it's a definitive sound. You are not guessing and spelling what that roar is. That animal has a distinguished roar. And so it is a roar of strength. It is a roar of, just raw power. And so we get our power back by taking it back. And you take back your power by becoming the best version of who you are meant to be. And that comes from personal and professional development. And so I roared out my story so that I can empower you when you listen to it to say, if she went through that, I can too.
Yes. Yeah. And what I did a lot of studying about the female lion, and the lioness does all the work, the hunting, the protecting, taking care of the kids. The male lion shows up if it's, something big and he's got to help. But the lioness, she has that roar. And I think you were just, as you were talking about your roar through the whole thing, and how you didn't let anything stop you, because the same reason the lioness doesn't for your kids. And I could hear you just constantly putting their welfare above all things. And so you are a true lioness.
And my bird sign is Leo the lion. What a coincidence.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. And wow, you had quite a story, but you're here and you're resilient. And that's what Roaring Boldly is about, is that not that we don't ever have problems, but that we don't give up. And your story is one of that, of never giving up. No matter what hit you, you found a way to protect your kids, to go forward, to live your life as boldly as you live it. And so I thank you so much for joining us today. And wow, I say that a lot on this. Wow, women have come on with so many strong stories. And so I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, particularly Clover, and for all her honesty and sharing. I hope that someone out there is hearing this that needs to hear this and learn how to be as resilient as she has. And this is Dr. Deborah, and she roars boldly. Thank you again for joining us. See you next week. Bye.